I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I am Sunil Dasgupta. Early voting in the 2022 primary elections in Maryland started on July 7th. Mail ballots are still being sent out. One of the key questions in the elections in Montgomery County is whether the county can become business friendly. Montgomery County has had a long reputation for being tough for business and widely compared unfavorably with Northern Virginia and in particular Fairfax County, which is roughly the same size as Montgomery. After asking this question in various ways of various people for a couple of years now, I decided at last to ask Julie Verratti, the co-founder of Denizens Brewing Company in downtown Silver Spring, and the entrepreneur who brought local brewing to Montgomery County. The first break, really, in the liquor monopoly held by the county's alcohol beverage services. Verratti was also a running mate for a gubernatorial campaign in 2018 and worked for the Biden administration during the COVID years in the Small Business Administration. If anyone can put business and politics together, I thought, it should be Julie Verratti.
Let them stay your girl. You'll always have your own. But take something for granted and it will be taken from you. This I've come to know.
If you're new to the show, I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools, and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians, but no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. It is my hope that this podcast will help those who feel left out reconnect in our local communities. Music for this episode comes from the Treading Lemmings, a Rockville-based Britpop band in the genre of the Smiths. Their music is available on ReverbNation.com.
I gave yesterday. And if you want to hear my take, let there be care. Bust off your day. She's there, I say. Please won't you share? Come share my
In the news this week, the Chief of Security for the Supreme Court asked the states of Maryland and Virginia and counties surrounding Washington, D.C. to remove protesters from outside the homes of Supreme Court justices who live there. There have been small protests outside of the homes of the justices for a long time now, but following the overturning of Roe v. Wade and conservative assertion in a number of recent decisions, the number and loudness of the protesters has increased significantly. The Supreme Court is asking local and state jurisdictions to enforce local laws, but of course, this is not all easy. Local officials and law enforcement have long balanced First Amendment rights with public order concerns, and not always in favor of the First Amendment. But the populace of Washington, D.C. suburbs are politically seething, especially at the Supreme Court's conservative majority, and it would not be surprising if local judges rule in favor of protesters should police act to remove them. Adjacently, climate activists shut down traffic on the Capitol Beltway I-495 this July 4th. 13 people were arrested, but that is often the point of civil disobedience. It is both disruptive and it has costs. Also adjacent, Governor Hogan lowered Maryland's standard for issuing gun permits, which is expected to put more guns into private hands in the state, raising even greater concerns about protests turning violent. The Democratic leadership of the Maryland legislature has vowed to remedy the situation in the next session. Now, some news analysis. How protesters and officials deal with growing civil and sometimes violent demonstrations will shape our political temperature. Just like the 1960s, the 2020s is shaping up to be a decade of discontent. Recall as well that the first part of the 60s saw significant economic expansion, as we are doing now in the first part of the 2020s. After the white supremacist rally in Charlottesville in 2017, where Heather Heyer was killed by a protester driving a car into a crowd, I asked myself, why Charlottesville and not Rockville? The easy answer is that the Confederate statues are there in Charlottesville. Rockville had one statue that was quickly removed once there was opposition to it. To dig into this a little more, I did a small experiment. I called Charlottesville and Rockville City Halls to ask how I could get protest permits. The Charlottesville office was clear, sent me to a website with clear directions, but to figure out how to protest in downtown Rockville took me several phone calls, long waits to hear back on messages, and then I finally gave up. Now, obviously, Rockville has protests, permits are issued, and First Amendment rights are protected. But my little experiment showed that Rockville permits are harder to get. To determine where and how protests will happen, to understand protesters and public safety officials, we will need to look at local statutes. Spatial analysis is really hard on a podcast, but if you have ideas, please reach out at ihppod@gmail.com or on Twitter at ihppod. I'll be back with Julie Verratti, co-founder of Denizens Brewing in downtown Silver Spring.
Had a feeling about it, couldn't quite explain. Deja vu, this sadness in the sound of the road. To the lunar culture, it was time to play.
Julie Verratti, welcome to Our Hit Politics.
Thanks for having me, Sunil. How are you doing today?
I am good.
Good.
All right. So you are the co-owner of Denizens Brewing in Silver Spring, and part of the spring you spent in making a decision whether to remain in the county or not.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about the stakes in that decision. What were the different factors you were weighing? How did they come about? And what did you finally decide?
So I think it's less about whether we want to stay in the county or not. I think you and I have spoken about this offline a few times, but it's really just a matter of, all right, so to back up, put it a little bit more context. So we signed our lease in 2013. And so our lease is up in the next year and a half in Silver Spring. And at that point, we can decide whether to renew the lease, try to renegotiate the lease because we can get an extension, or, we've done our lease obligation, we close our doors and, move over and consolidate everything to Riverdale Park, our second location. There's a couple of factors going on into the decision. One, we're not brewing in Silver Spring anymore. Because we opened a much larger production facility in Riverdale Park, we were able to move all of our brewing equipment over to Riverdale. And so because of that, we don't necessarily need such a large building in Silver Spring to operate a tap room, right? Because you pay the rent per square foot. So why operate in a building that's much larger than you actually need for a tap room? Okay, so that's one thing. And if we stay in the current building that we're in, that sort of stops us from being able to actually have a tap room in a different location, right? So that's one. Number two, when I say business climate is kind of off right now, I'm not saying it in the sense that's like, oh, that Montgomery County is terrible and bad and all of Montgomery is like oppressing us from being able to have a successful business. I think it's a combination of a bunch of things going on. One, obviously, we're coming out of a multi-year global pandemic that not only depressed the economy in our immediate market, but over the entire world. So that's number one. Number two, a part of what has depressed the economy, and I think that has not sort of reinvigorated quite as much as we'd like it to be, is that consumer behavior, I think, has changed permanently. I actually believe, and don't ask me to give you some sort of like primary source for this because I don't have one. Okay, this is observations by Julie Verratti. Okay, I think that there's a group of people in our society, probably I want to say it's about 15, maybe 20%, that these are folks that used to go out about town, maybe once a month, twice a month at most. That are just never going to go back out again.
Do you think the masking issue is relevant as far as your business is concerned?
It's not a problem now because there's no mask mandate. This is a moot point right now. I mean, it's possible we'll come back. And I have seen political leaders in Montgomery County say as such that it might come back if necessary. I've not seen that messaging in Virginia. Now, mind you, I don't live in Virginia. I don't have a business in Virginia, so I'm not proactively looking for it. It's possible people over there have said it. But I have seen it here in Montgomery County. So that, again, it's every time a new mandate comes on or then it comes off. It's like, oh, you can be 50% capacity. Oh, now it's 25%. Now you're full capacity. Oh, now we're back to 50%. Now we're outdoor only, but now we're indoor. It's just the level of pivoting and having to constantly change. So like when I hear someone suggest that we might go back to mask mandates in the future, I start having these like immediate physical reaction, like heart palpitation, like, oh my God, we have to pivot again. What's going to happen? When is this going to happen? Why? It's just so much because we have a team that they every day it's like, okay, this is what the new rules are. And you have to constantly retraining folks that work on your team. Customers are coming out for the first time and the rules are different Monday and then they come back Friday and it's like, oh, now you got to wear a mask. You didn't have to 5 days ago, but it's just a lot to manage.
Okay. COVID is one thing, but Montgomery County has long been considered not so friendly to business and certainly in comparison to Northern Virginia. And increasingly, I am told Prince George's County, right? Can you sort of think back and give me a sense of what is different about Montgomery County with respect to doing business here as opposed to, you're in Prince George and here, and you have some business in Northern Virginia. So what is the comparative relative argument here?
Well, I can tell you that all jurisdictions have paperwork. You always got to deal with that, and that's fine. I actually think Montgomery County does a good job using technology. Like they do more things online than other jurisdictions that I've experienced, which I appreciate. I actually think the state of Maryland has gotten a lot better with that as well over the years. I don't think Montgomery County, it's hard to explain. When we were opening here's how I'll put it. When we were opening our doors, 8 years ago in Silver Spring, we had to explain our business to everybody. Now, mind you, we were creating a brand new business model, but I didn't think it was that complex what we were trying to do. This is not like we're inventing some sort of brain surgery thing, right? This was a brewery that makes beer that wants to sell it to consumers directly, right? It's not that weird. And it felt like I was pulling teeth when I was trying to explain it to people. Some people got it. When they got it, they're like, yes, let's do this. This sounds like a great idea. Folks, in fact, little known fact about our Congressman Jamie Raskin, he is one of the reasons that Denizens, as well as all the other breweries in Montgomery County, can operate. Because when he was the state senator at the time, he was a sponsor of the 2 bills that we got put through to create the business model. And then on the county council level, Hans Riemer was really supportive and championed on the council level. We needed to get laws passed on the state level, but he was our champion to like get the county to be like, yes, we support this. Let's do this, move forward with it. So I've always been grateful to him for that. But there was just a lot of steps. And it never feels like, save for, you're having a one-on-one conversation with someone who is either an elected official or someone who works for the executive office. It always feels like I am looked down upon because I'm a small business owner. That like there's this feeling of like I must be evil or greedy, or there's something bad about me or nefarious about my intentions because I own a business. Now compare that to when we were opening in Prince George's County. Now we weren't necessarily seeking out like, oh, let's go to Prince George's County. It was the landlord and the developer from where we ended up, the Cafords Company, owns this mixed use area. They proactively reached out to us and asked us to come there and open our doors. And they recruited us. They really tried to support us and invested time and some capital to get us to come over there. And when it came to all of the sort of permitting and working with the county over there, it wasn't easier than Montgomery County. I'm not going to sit here and tell you there was. It was still a lot of the same hoops you got to jump through. But there was this culture of, thank you for contributing to our local economy. Thank you for being a part of this community. Thank you for, taking a chance on Prince George's County and opening your doors here and creating jobs here. There was subtle messaging in all of that, whether it was either proactively said or like at the bottom of the letterhead, it would say things like that, like when you get the form letters or whatever. And that seems like a really small thing, but it is really scary to open a business when you risk as much as you do to be like, all right, I'm throwing caution to the wind and now I'm completely on my own. And if I'm going to make money and survive and make my own bill payments, I got to make money somehow. That's really scary to do. And so when you're going into an environment where people are saying, thank you for taking this risk, it means a lot. And it gives you that sort of boost of confidence. It makes you it makes the fear and anxiety a little less, if that makes sense.
Small things make a difference, like a thank you or an appreciation. Why do you think in Montgomery County we don't do that?
I don't know.
Do you think it has to do with the fact that most people that live, particularly in southern Montgomery County, or even much of Montgomery County, actually work for the government and, NIH kinds of places?
I mean, it could be, but I don't necessarily think that means like if someone works for the government, they must be anti-business. I worked for the government. I wouldn't call myself anti-business.
That's right? What I was going to ask you.
I'm not anti-government either, right? Like I don't.
Yeah, you were in the government. So
I was in the government, yeah.
Yeah, and so
twice even.
Exactly. So and you ran for public office.
I did. I got my ass handed to me, but I tried.
Somebody's got to lose. But tell me, so you were on the other side of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And being on the other side of it, what explains the behavior, the general attitude in Montgomery County that you describe is like, oh, if you're a private business owner, you must be bad for society, which I think is what you're saying, right?
I don't think it's as drastic as you must be bad for society. It's a lack of understanding, I think. And sometimes at its worst case, a lack of or an unwillingness to even learn what it's like. Like I don't expect someone who works for government who's never worked for or run or owned a small business to know exactly what that's like. For same reason that like I've never been a teacher in school, so I don't want to sit here and claim to know what it's like to be a teacher. That being said, if I were in office and that part of my responsibility was overseeing education, I would make it my priority to learn what it's like to be a teacher. Like that's an important thing to know about perspective. I don't ever see, I haven't had the experience where I've had someone who's in office who oversees, economic development, say, hey, what is it actually like every day? Like, what does your Monday look like? What does your week to week look like what are all the decisions you're having to make? What are all the bills you have to pay? What are all the things that that come down the pike for you on a regular basis that you're constantly having to deal with. And thinking about that stuff, like, for example, here's something. Almost every single quarter or month, there's some random thing that I need to renew, right? So here's an example. My solicitor's license in Maryland comes up every year in October. My solicitor's license in DC comes up every 3 years. My liquor license in Montgomery County is due on April 1st. My liquor license in Prince George's County is due on March 31st. My alcohol manufacturing license for the state of Maryland is due on, I want to say April 15th or something. Same with my wholesaler's license, April 15th. Our health license is due at a different time. It's like, and our excise taxes on the state level, up until this past year, I've been advocating for this in Annapolis literally since 2014, asking that on the state level, because we make alcohol, so we have to pay excise taxes. Understandably, I'm not complaining about that. Alcohol creates negative externalities. We need to have a fund to help, protect against that. But on the state level, we've had to file our excise taxes every single month. Whereas on the federal level, a brewery of our size, we have to file it quarterly. Now, here's the issue with that. In order to file our state excise tax forms, it's based off of the federal forms. So I have to fill out a dummy version of the federal form every month in order to file my Maryland, right? They just fixed this past year. Okay, so quarter one, 2022, I was able to do a quarterly tax filing, all right, as opposed to, however, they couldn't get it perfect. I know they tried. In the state of Maryland, it's due by the 10th of the month, whereas on the federal level, it's due by the 15th. All right, so these are all, sales and use tax is due by the 20th every month. So there's all these different things that's constantly going around. What would be the best, most user-friendly, small business-friendly specifically thing is if they could just create a department of all the bullshit you got to deal with, and I can just write one check once a year and send it to that department and say, here's the check to pay for all the things I owe you. My liquor license, my health license, my solicitor's license, my excise taxes, all of the things, personal property taxes, all of those things. If I could just send one check a year or once a quarter, it doesn't even have to be a year. And I just check the box for all the things that I'm paying for. And that's it. Because remember, all of these things I just explained to you, I'm dealing with totally different offices. So I have to know the health department in PG County, the health department in Montgomery County, Department of, State Department of Taxation, the comptroller's office, all these different things going on. Not to mention the liquor licenses in each place. And, the health license rules are also different. So like you have to have a health manager's license in PG County for a certain number of years, and then it renews, X number of, years. And in Montgomery County, it's different. So it would be a lot easier as a state. This is not just about Montgomery County or Prince George's County. As a state, Maryland could be a much more user-friendly and business-friendly place if it just simplified things. I think I personally, and I don't claim to speak for every business owners, I'm sure people would disagree with me on this, I would pay higher taxes if my time wasn't taxed as much. I'd be more than willing to pay a bigger check if I didn't have to spend as much time as I do filling out random paperwork, renewing random licenses all of the time. It drives me nuts. Offsite permit, I just remember another one. That's due on January 1st every year. Like, why is that? Why are the comptroller office things due at random times throughout the year? Just have it be one thing. It doesn't make any sense to me.
There's one thing about recognizing what the problem is. And another part is that government is an entity as well, right? And as you know, you have to make government work. It's not just a matter of, decreeing something from the county executive's chair or from the president's chair, right?
Right.
I mean, so where is that balance between knowing government, which I think some of our political leaders do know, and on the other hand, knowing the travails of running a business, which a business person would know, right? How do we balance those two objectives? And I'm asking you because voters are going to decide between exactly that on that question.
I think here's what I think. I think a lot of times in government, and I'm speaking from my experience on the federal level here. Okay, so I've never worked for local government or state government. I've worked in and around the space where I've done, lobbying, not just currently, but in the
Say what you did for the federal government, just so that everybody knows.
Yeah. I'll get into that. So I spent 5 years prior to opening Denizens as a senior policy advisor and a presidential management fellow at the Small Business Administration. After starting Denizens, I spent most of 2021 serving the Biden administration, working at the Small Business Administration again as the Associate Administrator of Field Operations. What that means is I oversaw the 68 field offices and 10 regional offices across the country, about 1,000 employees, over $100 million budget, just tons of activity. We're basically the face of the customer service arm of the Small Business Administration. So our job was to know every single program and be able to relay that information and advocate for and help small businesses and would-be small businesses get access to the programs. Now, my focus when I was there was obviously a lot of, implementing COVID recovery programs for small businesses across the country. And I think sometimes, when you're in government, and this is something that I have to think about too, is a small business. So when we come up with a new product idea or a launch for something, and we're trying to think about how do we communicate this, my default is to think about it from my perspective. What are the things that I care about, this new beer, like how I'm going to describe it? It's the same thing with government. So when I'm thinking about like a new program, I'm thinking about it from my perspective. So I'll accidentally use things like acronyms when I'm announcing a new program, or I'm, thinking about how do we make this as convenient for me as possible. So if we're going to receive your application, I need it to be sent only Monday through Friday at this time, and it's got to go to this thing. Whereas we forget in the government, no, we are here to be of service to the American people. We are here. It is a privilege to be of service. Their tax dollars, and obviously my tax dollars do, because you pay taxes if you work for the government, is funding my salary. And I need to make sure that every day my focus is eagle eye on the customer, which is the American people. And so that was one of the things I was really focused on, was like, no, get out of your own way. Put yourself in the shoes of the small business. And if that small business wants to apply for something, and it means they give you a phone call, they send you a text message, they do it online, they do email, they physically walk into your building to hand you a piece of paper. You have to be open and willing to be able to accept it at every single level. So that's an example of how you kind of make government like work for the people and for customers. I think thinking about it that way. I think, again, on the federal level, there's a lot of partisanship in Washington, right? And so people in the federal government are afraid of getting FOIA'd. They're afraid of getting taken to task by the other side. And that's, and this is not, I think, just, political appointees, but also like career civil servants can get caught up in this bullshit sometimes. You can be petrified. You're sitting there thinking, okay, how do I word this email? You end up sounding like a robotic weirdo, because you're like, okay, is someone gonna like FOIA this email, and then like I'm gonna get asked to go testify in front of Congress because of some crazy thing that's going on? And I think that when you are in a constant state of fear, it is really hard to take bold action, right? And so how do you do that in an environment like that?
Yeah, how do you?
You just kind of have to not give a shit and understand. Oh, that sounds a little cavalier. You have to. I truly believe that people are trying to be of service and do good, and I believe that about people in office. And I think leaders need to give their employees in the government the space and the confidence and support to know, like, hey, take a risk, like do bold action. If it means it's going to do something good for society, I got your back. And I want leaders in office that will do that.
You said that David Blair would be a leader like that, but he doesn't have any government experience and perhaps has less knowledge than his opponent, incumbent county executive Mark Eldridge, or even longtime council member Hans
But
Niemer.
He's got the thing that I think is most important that I've already said, which is he has the ability to be on the other side of it.
Okay. I want to ask you about what makes a small business a small business. You said you're a small business, but somebody else could say that they are, a small business at, $50 million, or somebody would say, they're a small business at $50,000, right? So if we have a category that serves everyone from $50 million to $50,000 based on how many employees you have. How does that make sense? And how do you design policy?
Doesn't make sense. There's a huge difference between a business that has 30 employees that's been around for 30 years and has, $2 million annual revenue versus a business that is a year old that has 30 employees and $2 million annual revenue. Even though our policies will say, same business, 2 million, 30 employees. In your first 5 years of operating, you are in debt. You're trying to get your feet underneath you. You have no idea if you're going to make it year to year, day to day. It's a brand new thing for you. So we should be treating younger businesses different from older established businesses. So that's one category that I just want to say. And then in terms of how I define a small business, it's really at the end of the day, if I don't show up and do something, or if my employee doesn't show up and do something, it's not going to get done. There's no corporate massive infrastructure to come in and there's thousands of people to take care of it. There's not millions of dollars laying around for me to pay someone. It really truly is. It's not necessarily mom and pop, because you don't necessarily have to be a married couple to own a small business, but it is, revenue is part of it. But also I think it's, and I do believe that employee size is part of it as well, but it's also looking at what types of employees you have. Do you have an internal, team of lawyers that works for you full time? No. Do you have an internal CPA or controller that works for you full time, or a floor of accountants that works for you full time? No. And that's partly one of the reasons why when new rules and regulations come down, it is much more difficult for small businesses to adhere to them. And it's not because small businesses are trying to get around the rules. It's because the person who's in charge of dealing with the licensing and the rule following is also the person who's sending out the email marketing. They're doing the social media. They are training the new employees. They're trying to, come up with a, annual donation plan for the year. They're doing the big, the business about, they're doing all these other things. So this new rule comes down and you're like, oh, I didn't even know about that. What was that? So that's one of the reasons why I'm actually a huge supporter of local chambers of commerce, because they can sort of be the one-stop shop to be like, hey, here's everything you need to know about what's impacting your business.
You made the distinction between young and established businesses. How would making that distinction affect our rulemaking about small business?
During COVID, I think you and I talked about this before. It is crazy to me that people were allowed to go to Home Depot. It was not shut down at all. This is a massive multinational corporation, but they weren't allowed to go to their local general store down the street because the general store was considered unsafe. But by default, the Home Depot was allowed. You were allowed to go there. You were allowed to go to, the Giant or the Safeway if you weren't necessarily allowed to go to the local bodega. That is an example of where the state and the county made decisions that very specifically said, we're choosing between large businesses, massive corporations, and small businesses, and we've chosen the large corporations as the people that we want to protect and serve.
Do you think the state and local governments act against small businesses, truly like the bodegas and the local general store, but can't do anything against Home Depot because Home Depot is just too darn big for them? And if they do something to Home Depot will come back at them.
And I hope not, man. And that's an example of needing bold leadership. That's an example of someone saying, yeah, I get that Home Depot is this big, huge company that, millions of tax dollars and income tax and sales tax and all that. But if this small business shuts down, I may bankrupt an entire family. Whereas if that Home Depot shuts down, they're going to be fine because I guarantee you they're operating in full in Florida.
Julie Verratti, good luck with Denizens. I hope consumer behavior returns.
It will one day.
Drunken buzz, much like any other. I can play better than this one, that's a halo grape shot, he hit the ceiling. The ginger man really shook the walls. We've been looking for something.
What lessons can we draw from my conversation with Julie Virati, who co-founded Denizens Brewing Company in downtown Silver Spring? First, it is a little hard to truly pinpoint the reasons for why Montgomery County has fallen behind in its appeal to business owners. But just because it is hard to find causation, it does not mean that this is not the reality. And the appeal to small business owners may have fallen even more than it has for large businesses. Worth keeping in mind that Montgomery County has historically been a bedroom community. Second, many people will tell you that Montgomery County's job growth is anemic, but puzzlingly, the county's population continues to grow. This means one uncomfortable fact. Montgomery County may be growing further as a bedroom community rather than as mixed use or urban expansion. This obviously has big consequences for transportation infrastructure because residents now have to commute long distances. But bringing new jobs to the county is hardly easy. Amazon's decision to go to Alexandria instead was a clear signal. But Virati's frustration and her consideration of a move out of Montgomery County to Prince George's County ought to be a wake-up call. Third, in being business-friendly, Montgomery County finds itself in a bind. It is unclear, for example, whether changing the face on the billboard alone will solve the problem. But there is very little understood, let alone discussed by campaigns, about how to implement a new business-friendly regime. Below the political level, Montgomery County is governed by a vast bureaucracy that will then need to change its ways to adhere to the business friendliness of its changed and new county leadership. Fast-paced changes that are possible in private companies are hard to imagine in the public sector, and indeed, the public sector is designed to resist that kind of change. Yet, there are times so dire that people will want to take this risk. Certainly, Julie Virati believes that this change will only come once the county's leadership changes.
Skipping into low, we go Cass and I. We're still looking for answers.
That's all for this episode. You've been listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. Music for this episode comes from the Treading Lemmings, a Rockville-based Britpop band in the genre of the Smiths. Their music is available on Reverb Nation. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone who might want to, please email us at ihppod@gmail.com or reach out on Twitter at ihppod. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and your home. See you next time.
Going house to house.